Johnny Harris does not understand supply and demand. In a recent video, he discussed the egg market. While acknowledging the effects of the recent bird flu outbreak, he claims it wasn't enough to explain the recent price hikes. Here we've got a graph of the egg price in blue, and in the red we have egg production. Now, in order to see such a price hike, he assumes that the supply would need to drop by this much. But when it didn't, he declared supply and demand broken. But we should ask, is this assumption true in the first place? With a smaller drop, nevertheless, we're still talking about 100 million dozen eggs per month, but was it enough to explain the change in price? To answer this, we need to talk about the elasticity of demand, the kind of thing you see in your week 3 course of Principles of Microeconomics. It's just a single number that represents the price sensitivity of consumers. When the price goes up, how much do they pull back their consumption? So if you look at the graph of his baseline assumption, he assumes production should have fallen to about 225 million dozen eggs per month. Compared to a 625 million starting point, that's a decline of 65%. And that coincides with a price hike of about 120%, which means we can apply our elasticity formula to get 0.54. Now remember this number because we're going to compare it with other stuff later on. This might be a little easier to see if we look at the supply and demand graph. He might be thinking it looks something like this. We get a modest decline in supply, and that results only in a modest increase in price. But instead, we saw a massive increase in price, and so he argues we should have seen a massive decrease in supply. But we didn't, hence supply and demand broke. But another option is that consumers have never really been that price sensitive to eggs. What if their demand was always relatively inelastic? Then even a small shift in supply will result in a very large shift in egg prices. Eggs fit the two theoretical reasons for inelastic demand. Number one, there's very few substitutes. Meat is much more expensive, and beans are culinarily quite different, and not everybody's into cornflakes and milk for breakfast. And number two, eggs are a very small portion of most households' budgets. Now let's test it with data. What is the demand elasticity for eggs? Economists have been estimating this number for decades, and they get an average of 0.18. That's 3 times more inelastic than Johnny Harris assumed. To visualize the difference, he assumed the demand graph for eggs would look like this, but in reality, it's a whole lot more steeper, like the one on the left. Now, if you notice, all of these studies are using data that predate the pandemic. What has been happening since? Well, we got the data right here. It's in Johnny Harris's chart. It comes from the USDA and the BLS. I uploaded it all, put it in a spreadsheet. It turns out the demand for eggs is quite inelastic, but is it unreasonably so? I estimate an elasticity of 0.17, which is exactly in line with what studies have found for decades. Consumers behaved exactly as we would expect them to for a supply shock of this size. Nevertheless, the Department of Justice is opening up an investigation against some egg producers, and by all means, do it. The producer Cal Maine has been found guilty for price fixing before. This is for a stint between 2004 and 2008, but they didn't cause a huge amount of damage. They were found liable for 17 million, and so if they find evidence of collusion this go around, I doubt it will be enough to explain the very large price hikes. This industry is just so much bigger than all that. It produced $22 billion in revenue last year. A few tens of millions is not going to affect the market by that much. Links and sources here in the bio. The tag came from 2 great quick thought videos, which are linked below.